Thank you so much. Yes, that's the talk. So resistance is futile, adopting AI into developer workflows, hopefully without either destroying your IP or our planet. Those would be things that we want to avoid. So a little bit about myself. I'm a developer advocate at JetBrains, currently in my second year. Very, very much enjoying it. Before that, for 15 years, I was a professional educator. So I ran graduate academies. I helped students make the transition into industry. And I helped teams who were migrating from one platform to another. So I tend to approach everything from that kind of educational background. I'm always thinking, okay, how do we teach this to the next generation? How do we migrate existing developers into this kind of thing? And before that, for 5 or 6 years, I was a good old regular software developer. Excuse me. What I did before that, I normally don't mention, yeah? But at the moment, it's really, really relevant. So I did a philosophy and psychology degree, joint honors from the University of Durham in England. On this side of the pond, you would say I majored in cognitive science. I absolutely love that because it makes it sound like I had a damn clue what I was actually doing at the time. But if you know the history of AI research, this was the second big tsunami of interest in AI because for the first time, people were coding up neural nets and everybody were really, really interested in connectionism and is the brain just one big neural network and can we simulate the brain in software and so on. So I got caught up in all that enthusiasm and I lived with a whole bunch of PhD students who thought they were building, mechanical brains in the lab and so on and were really, really disappointed to discover that they weren't. Yeah? We've gone through these phases of huge interest in AI. My colleague Rachel, she put up this tweet today, absolutely wonderful, although of course I cannot now talk to her because I was a Spectrum 48K developer, but never mind. Yeah. So there have been these huge tsunamis of interest in AI, and this time it does look like we're genuinely getting somewhere. So a few personal observations just to start us off. As somebody who was a late entrant to IT, I have a lot of friends in other professions. So people doing law, people doing finance, people in policing and medicine and that kind of thing. And they're almost keener with AI than we are at the moment. Have you seen this? That you have somebody who's your lawyer or your accountant or whatever, and they just want to talk to you about AI and all the wonderful things that they're using it for. So I have never seen a technology being adopted so quickly. I was at a conference for CTOs and entrepreneurs and so on, and there were people from marketing saying, this is great, we don't have to hire as many junior copywriters anymore, yeah? So, we are literally gone from zero to preventing people from being hired in 12 to 18 months. I mean, and that's staggering. And it's already an everyday use for all of these things here, yeah, including coming up with conference abstracts. So I was trying to think of a nice way of summarizing this, but my friend Andrew Bolster, who's a data scientist in Belfast, he published this blog post a couple of days ago for me. Well, for me personally, but it really, really helped me. And as he says there, this has been great / horrifying for feels like jobs like turning bullet points into prose, vice versa, or generic programming. So it used to be thought that if you were a manual worker, well then your job was in danger of automation. So let's say you were a taxi driver, you used to have the knowledge, as they said in London, and then sat-nav took an awful lot of that away. And then eventually we're probably going to have self-driving taxis, maybe. Yeah? But if you're a manual worker, your job will eventually be automated. But if you were a knowledge worker, yeah, then your job was in some way safe. Well, that's now very much in danger. And then just thinking about our own industry, let's say no production code ever gets written by an LLM, okay? Well, it doesn't matter, yeah? The industry is still being reshaped by AI at the moment because from my current job and my previous job, I work with a lot of CTOs, I work with a lot of managers who are managing a team of 5 all the way up to a team of 500, and they're really interested in using AI to educate the next generation, to bring the next generation into the industry as quickly as possible, or to discover requirements or create requirements documents, or go to those requirements documents and extract features or test scenarios, yeah? And then doing analysis of existing code and trying to find violations in IP or security flaws or redesign things, and so on. So, obviously, at a conference like this, as developers, we're all very interested in the generation of code, but that might just be the tip of the iceberg. I think it's going to reshape our industry from directions that we can't even understand at the moment. And this talk was actually being written in real time. Did anybody see this announcement this morning? Yeah. So partnership between OpenAI and Stack Overflow. So the industry is being reshaped right now as we speak. And then the final observation, a little bit sarcastic, but it is funny whenever you're sitting down with people and they go, we have these data and we have these algorithms and so on. And, we can't just put it out there in the cloud and trust it to other companies with nothing but legal agreements between that and them using all of our data. And I kind of look at them and I go, hold on a minute. You're keeping all your source code in GitHub. You have Slack channels where you talk about your customers in all kinds of detail. You just showed me your business plan for the next 6 months in Google Docs. So it's not that your concerns aren't wrong or invalid. It's just that you went red pill about 10 years ago. It's a little bit late to be thinking about this. So a lot of the objections that people have to generative AI, they're not wrong, but they should have had them about other things a decade ago. So it bemuses me, it vexes me a bit, but there you go. So what are we going to be talking about today? So I'm going to be showing you the JetBrains AI tooling, because I'm from JetBrains. So we'll look at what we're offering at the moment and how it can help you as a developer. And we'll talk about the journey that JetBrains and similar companies are on to integrate AI into IT workflows and where that journey is going to take us in the future. And hopefully, we'll be able to extract some general conclusions or some general questions from this. So what kind of questions? Well, from adding AI into our tooling, how much can productivity be enhanced? If it is enhanced, where are the main gains going to come from? And can these gains be sustained as models go out of date and things like this? And of course, what will be the downsides? As well as the upsides, what are the downsides going to be? So we're going to be using the JetBrains family of IDEs. I'm going to be using IntelliJ IDEA with Kotlin because that's the language and environment I know best. We're going to be using the AI Assistant within the IDE, and we're going to be mentioning this new thing called AI Enterprise as well. So that's the tooling that we're going to be covering. But we'll be covering this as an exemplar of what we as an industry are doing with generative AI right now. So we have our IDE, and we've done deep embedding of AI into it. So there are now all these places in the IDE where you can access AI functionality. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. But as I say, I am from JetBrains, wouldn't be doing my job if there wasn't a little bit of marketing. Brace yourself for the marketing slide. There it is. Okay, so at JetBrains, what we're after is productivity. Okay, we make our money, our kids get shoes, by enhancing your productivity as developers. We want to get you into this flow state that we all love as developers and keep you in it for as long as humanly possible. That's our mission. So that's what we're trying to do with our AI assistant. And I'm only going to be able to show it briefly in this talk. If you're interested, there's a huge amount more material available online at YouTube, on our website, and so on. So let's dive in and do a simple example. There's actually 3 simple examples I use when I'm doing these kinds of talks. There's a link to the GitHub repo where you can download them and have a look. Just before I show you the example, as an educator, this fascinates me because, in a room like this, with only 50 minutes, there's only so much I can do. I can't introduce a problem domain that nobody else in, North America has ever heard of. So something that only somebody from Ireland and small corner of Ireland would actually understand. Something like this. I have to show you something that you're going to understand. So I want something that's familiar, relevant, intelligible, and so on. But then you're going to say to me, that bowling kata or that poker hand kata or whatever, that's in the LLMs training set. And that's a fair criticism, But I just don't know how you square that circle. I don't know how you get round the problem. And also showing solutions to these problems is even harder because there's no guarantee that the same prompt will generate the same results. Has anybody ever tried to do a demo of their friends of AI? Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah, you know where I'm going with this. So you tried the prompt on Monday and you went, yay, and you showed it to a friend on Tuesday and it gave you something completely different. So I know advocates from Google, AWS, all kinds of companies all over the place, and we all have this problem, okay? So as I say, my background is in philosophy. You know the saying, you cannot step in the same river twice, yeah? Well, you cannot step in the same LLM demo twice, okay? So we'll run the demo and see what happens. I've got backup slides. If you ever do this, I strongly recommend you have backup slides as well, okay? So the inspiration for this little demo, it was one of my Twitter friends there on the left who does traditional photography, photography with film-based cameras. And he was having a go at how much math was actually involved. And this reminded me of my childhood because my father was a really, really keen photographer. And he used antique cameras, or as we called them at the time, cameras, which used regular film. So this is me when I was wee. This is me when I was 5. And I was mucking around with my dad with antique cameras, and his was loaded with film and mine wasn't. So if you're doing traditional photography, there's this thing called the exposure value. And this is a setting that you can put on your camera to make best use of the available lighting conditions. And I kind of vaguely heard about this, but I'd never actually researched it. So I thought, now's the time, okay? So as I say, you have this setting on your camera, EV, that's the exposure value, and it's the log 2 of N2 over T, where T is the exposure time, the time that you're going to expose the film, and N is the focal number. And this is the focal length of the lens divided by the diameter of the aperture. So I went ahead and tried to express this in Kotlin. So let's say I hadn't come up with this myself. Let's say as a junior developer, you'd been given that code and you want to try and make sense of it. So here it is here. So I can select the code and I can say option return to get up the intentions. And I can just tab sideways and get the intentions from the AI assistant. So you see here, I can just go backwards and forwards. So I can get the intentions from the AI assistant, and I can ask it to explain the code for me. So the advantage of using the AI assistant is that if your fingers are already programmed to use our IDEs, then the AI assistant is just automatically there. So the options are immediately available to you. Right, so you see here, I've only called the function EV to make it really hard, and there's nothing else in this project that in any way hints at photography. So behind the scenes, this is going out to OpenAI to get a result, and you see here, it's just describing the function to me in mathematical terms. It can't do any better, and you would expect that. So we can go in here, and let's just rename the function to be exposure. So I'll go in now, and I'll do just what I did before and say, okay, please explain the code to me. And now, hopefully, yes, we're off to the races. Yeah, so now it knows that we're working with photography. So now it can tell us what's going on and what the parameters actually do and so on. And I'm like you folks, the first time I saw this, it was just absolutely like magic. Yeah. So the advantage of having deep integration of AI into your tools is that I'm a big fan of DDD, so it can propel us into the right bounded context. It can move our understanding into the place where it needs to be. And that's incredibly powerful. So now that I know this is something to do with photography, I can go here and I can say refactor this code to stress the concepts from photography. And off we go. So now it'll go out and it'll offer a new version of the function where the parameters and the local variables and so on are renamed, and the link to photography is made clear. And then I can go up here and I can say, okay, I can copy it. I can insert it at the caret, or I can create it in a new file, and that's pretty cool. Just to show, if I go up to the top here, I can click on that wee link, and I can see the context. So I can say the file or files that information is being gathered from to be put into the prompt that's being sent to the LLM. And if I want to record what's going on, I can go here and I can say dump chat. And it will create a file with an automatically generated name, and I can scroll down and I can see, you know, everything that happened in my, my conversation with the LLM. Yeah? So you see here in my initial prompt, I just said, okay, explain exposure. But in order for that to make sense to the LLM, it had to send the details of the function and that this is Kotlin code and so on. So you can get insight into what's going on underneath the hood. So I could copy and paste this back in, and that would work fine. Once you get used to the tool, there would be a slightly neater way of doing it, though. Actually, I'll go here, and it's neater if you select the whole function. So go here, move to my intentions, and say suggest refactoring. And now, will it be smart enough to see the... Yes, so good. So you see here, it's worked out again that we're playing in the bounded context of photography, and it's made some good suggestions. If I didn't like the suggestions, I could continue the prompt. You know, I could keep going, yeah? But because we asked for it to refactor the code, we've got this option to see diff and apply. So I can go here, and it'll say, okay, I'm going to replace this with that, and all the changes, and so on, and I can say accept all. And then it's just going to go ahead and make those changes. Yeah? So very, very powerful. Of course, you know, if you do this enough times, it'll make slightly different suggestions each time. That's just the nature of going out and working with an LLM. So that gives you a little bit of initial insight into what the AI assistant is and how it works. Let me just summarize very quickly and move on. So we asked it to explain the code. It did the job. It just gave us a mathematical description. Not very good. Okay? So the AI assistant does have deep integration. Using it is automatic and seamless. If you already know how our IDEs work, yeah. But it needs a certain amount of context. It's not magic. Yeah? So we renamed the function to exposure, and then we get a much better description. Yeah? So we can give it the Chuck Norris thumbs up of success. Now we're working in the area of photography. So again, big fan of DDD. So the LLM is going out, and it's moving us into the correct bounded context for the problem at hand. We can ask it to refactor the function, and it can have a go at it. Really good. We could use those three icons there to copy everything over. But it's better if you use the suggest refactoring option. So then we get this see diff and apply. We can copy over our changes. We may need to do a little bit of cleanup. You know, it may have broken some things. If it's changed the name of the function, we'd have to rename that elsewhere and so on. But in general, it can suggest refactorings. It can enhance our use of the terminology from the bounded context. You can preview, you can further refine, you can keep going until you're happy. But first little philosophical point, any errors in the training data will become apparent. So within the bounded context of photography, there's this thing called the F number. Yeah? But some photographers call it the f-stop. Yeah? And some photographers call it the inverse relative aperture. What? Okay, so if you run this demo enough times or try different LLMs or whatever, you'll see these different solutions offered. Okay, so if there's confusion in the bounded context, there'll be confusion in the training data, and there'll be confusions in the suggestions that you get. And that's, I don't think there's any way around that problem. Yeah. So could the AI assistant suggest real-world test scenarios? Yes. Yeah. So I could keep doing this in the IDE, but I'll just go on with the slides because we've got limited time here. If you want to see this done in full detail, come find me and I'll sit down with you. So I can go here and I can say what real-world testing scenarios from photography should be considered. Okay. Notice the use of the word real-world. So as was said by previous presenters, prompt engineering is a thing. You want to be careful about what you say. So if you just say, give me some test scenarios, it'll say, well, that thing's an int. You know, what about 0, -1, 1, that sort of stuff. But if you say real-world testing scenarios, well, then it goes into the bounded context of photography. And it says, what about indoor? What about outdoor? What about low-level lighting? What about fast-paced sports? You know, all this kind of stuff. So it starts giving really, really relevant suggestions that we can look at. So you can use the AI assistant to suggest categories for tests, give you scenarios, give you starter values, and so on, but remember that your prompts are important. Are these correct? How on earth are you going to know without talking to a user? Okay, so second philosophical point, it's not magic. Yeah? So at some point you're going to actually need to go out and talk to your users and make sure that you're on the right track. I used to organize event storming workshops. Anybody ever participated or organized one of these? Yeah, so big bit of Agile and DDD, fantastic way to get a bunch of users and get the underlying concepts, and their terminology, and to let the bounded context and so on emerge. So you would obviously want to do something like this to make sure that you're on the right track. As previous speakers have said, just don't take it in faith that the LLM is correct. And now that we've got these test scenarios, I can just go in and say, convert these. Just convert these into JUnit test methods, and it'll do it. And it'll give me a warning to say, hey, make sure that you get your imports right, and so on. And then I can go out and I can generate a test. So you can generate test scenarios in code. You can ask for the frameworks of your choice, but you are going to need to refine it, because really good video here from one of my colleagues pointing out that LLMs are bad at math. LLMs are bad at generating random values and so on. And if nothing else, you'll need to fix the imports, So it'll generate the test scenarios for you as JUnit or whatever test framework you want, but you'll need to do a little bit of adjustment. So we can get perfectly normal JetBrains IDE functionality to generate the test. We can copy over our methods. But you see there, for the anticipated result, it's made a copy of the code from the function. So we're kind of marking our own homework here. We don't want to do that. So for the second time, I would have to go out and do real work. So in this case, I go to Wikipedia, and I get a table of exposure values, and I put in the right values, and my test passes. Yay. Okay. So if you're using the code generation functionality with the AI assistant, save you huge amounts of time when it comes to your testing. And the greater the convenience for you, the more testing that you're likely to do. And then there's all kinds of other shiny things that we don't really have time for. But just to summarize here briefly in the IDE, I could go in and I could grab the code here. And other things I could do is I could say, write documentation. And it'll go out and generate some nice commenting for my function. Or I could go in and I could bring up the Git menu, and I could say, okay, I want to do a commit. And I could push this here, and it'll generate the commit message for me. Ooh. Okay, so there's all this extra functionality that we don't really have time to show. But if you have regular expressions in your code, it'll explain the regex. If an exception is thrown, it'll explain the exception. It can explain SQL queries and so on. And it's great that these things are done. Unsurprising, though, because this is LLM functionality. These are the kinds of tasks that you would expect an LLM to be able to do well. And because prompt engineering is important, you can save and reuse your prompts. So if you discover that it's useful to be able to say, create test scenarios for real-world conditions or for photography conditions or whatever, or if you want to say, explain this code, but do it line by line, or refactor this code, but refactor it by adding explanatory variables. So you can create the prompts that work best for you in your scenario, and then you can save them. So that's the AI assistant. How does it actually work? So how did it get to this point, and where are we going to take it in the future? So in the beginning of the story, JetBrains partnered with OpenAI, and this is the architecture that they came up with. So inside your IDE, you've got the plugin, and whenever you ask for something to happen, it goes to the project and takes out some context. And that is then sent to the AI service, which is living out there in the cloud, and it does some authentication and makes sure that you are who you claim to be, make sure there's nothing malicious going on, and so on. And then once it's happy, it passes the prompt on to ChatGPT. At the moment, ChatGPT 3.5 or 4, and then the return value comes back again. So at a 10,000-foot level, that's how it works. But there are a bunch of problems that get solved along the way, and these are actually interesting. So let's talk about some of the problems. So as we've said, the prompts get sent to the provider, nothing's retained in the AI service, all good. Contextual information gets added in, code, the types of file and frameworks and use and so on, and that information doesn't get used for training. Huzzah, yeah? But problem number one, using an LLM takes time and costs money. A, because you're doing networking, yeah? And why does it cost money? Well, because the good folks at OpenAI need to eat, the same as the rest of us. But fortunately, you don't always need to go out to an external LLM in the case of relatively simple problems, and a big underline on relatively, okay? So if you take something like full line code completion, a complicated task, but not complex compared to all the other things that we're talking about. So the first part of the solution is to say, hey, you can go ahead and train up a model from scratch. So you can use the ChatGPT-2 architecture, 100 million parameters, get this model, train it up in those open source projects which have permissive licenses, and then you can include this within the IDE. So that you can then do single line code completion with no networking or wider infrastructure being needed. And because this is all happening within the IDE, it can be a separate feature, and you don't need to pay extra for it. Yay. So here it is here, yeah? So inside the IDE, we have this model doing full line code completion, so that's going to your project as well. Full line code completion would be better if we had a more powerful model. And that more powerful model could also do multi-line code completion. So as well as having this small model in the IDE, we can create a more powerful model. One with billions of parameters that can consider wider context, and we can build that into the AI service. So now, if I just flip ahead to the diagram, we've now got two models for doing code completion. One in the IDE and one in the AI service. So let's say you're typing like an absolute demon, yeah? Well, then there's no time to go out to the model in the cloud, just use the local model, yeah? But let's say that the user pauses and there is time and so on, we'll then send a request out to the AI service. So you can see there's a lot of nuance here. It's not just pass everything on to OpenAI. It's more complicated than that. So the next problem, and thinking ahead to the future now, talking about future functionality, we want to avoid vendor lock-in. So ChatGPT is great, but it is competition from Gemini, from AWS Bedrock, and weirdly itself, because this confused me a lot in the early days, that you've got OpenAI and Azure OpenAI, so, same kind of thing. So in the future, we might want to switch, between the different vendors. So let me just go to the architecture and talk you through what's on the slide. So in the future, you'll be able to use AWS, Amazon Bedrock, and Google Gemini, as well as OpenAI, and it's going to be implemented by this tasks API here. So this lives inside the AI service, and this serves as an abstraction layer. So the AI Assistant plugin isn't going to know which provider is being used. It's going to send a request to the AI service, and most of the AI service will use the tasks API. So it can create an abstract prompt, yeah? And then the tasks API will turn that abstract prompt into the real prompt that goes out to the vendor, whichever LLM we happen to be using. And if you have a pro subscription, that decision will be made by the AI service itself. Okay, so when would we choose which vendor to use? Well, let's say the context becomes very, very large. Well, that might require that we move from the default provider to another one. Or let's say that one particular provider is known to provide better quality for a particular kind of prompt. Or failover is a good thing, So if a particular vendor just isn't there that day, they're having a really bad day, then we can go to another provider instead. So this is future functionality, but this is the kind of architecture that we're moving to. And using multiple LLMs in a pragmatic way, this is something that other companies are doing as well. So before I was here, I was actually in Egypt, and before I was in Egypt, I was in Denmark, and I was doing a couple of events with Trifork, and CodeScene were also there presenting, and they have a tool that will analyze your code and automatically apply refactorings. And they go to different LLMs for different refactorings, very interesting. So they've gone out and done the legwork and worked out which particular vendors are better at doing which kind of code changes, and they pragmatically choose which LLM they want to use for a particular job of work. So if your company doesn't produce an LLM yourself, this is one of the ways in which you can go out and add value, as a third party. And then moving on, companies want observability. So companies want to know who amongst their developers is using the service, how much use they're making of it, what this is costing them, and so on. Perfectly legitimate concern. So the way that we're addressing that is we've just released an enterprise subscription, and it's going to add these features in. So if you're managing a really large company and you want to have observability in what your developers are up to, this is something that you can go out and use. So this is brand new and shiny, and we're going to keep adding features to this over time. And one feature in particular is that some companies have already selected their LLM vendor. So let's say you've gone out and you have your own legal agreement with AWS and Bedrock or Google and Gemini, whatever it happens to be. So a company wishes to say, okay, it's great that you can go to multiple vendors, but we want to hard code it. So we want all our staff to go out to Gemini or whatever it happens to be. Well, we're going to allow companies to do that, and they'll be able to use our existing IDE services to do that. So we already have these IDE services, and that lets a big company say, okay, which version of which IDE are developers allowed to install, with which versions of which plugins, and so on. So we're going to extend this so that they'll be able to pick the LLM as well. And then, again, we're going out into the future now. But some companies only want to use their own models because they're doing things that are very secure. So the data is too sensitive to be shared and so on. No external option is acceptable to them. So we're going to let companies run the AI service on premises and go out and connect to their own models. So everything in the top right there is in the cloud, yeah. But another way to do it will be to have the AI service running on premises, and then a company can go out and use their own custom models. And these can be models they've trained up themselves, or models that they've been given from some trusted third party, perhaps including JetBrains as well. Yay. And then finally, moving into the further future. So we all know, of course, that proprietary data shouldn't be in the training set of the LLM, but if you've been at the previous two talks about AI, and the people were talking about RAG and so on, and the idea that you can bundle extra context in the prompt, and this context can come from the company's own code bases or their own document repositories or whatever. Let's just call them knowledge bases, okay? So in the future, it will be possible for the AI service to consult your company's own knowledge bases and include that information, into the prompting. But that's for the future. We're not there yet. So we're 3 parts of 4 through this talk. We did the introduction first of all. Then we saw what the AI Assistant is and what it can do for you. Then we saw that the journey that we're on to implement this and the problems that we faced and how we've got around them and what we're going to do in the future. So part 4, hopefully that's answered some questions. So can you integrate AI into developer workflows? Yes. Will this increase their understanding and make them more productive? Yes. How much more productive? We're on a journey to find out. We'll get some hard numbers eventually. And there's also value in mediating between different providers. Yeah. Some other questions that we haven't seen answers to yet, but can they continue to improve? How does this affect education? And what new opportunities will arise? So let me finish off the talk by trying to answer those. Now, at this point, we're pulling out the crystal ball. This is all going to get very hand-waving, okay? But I'll do the best job I can. So before I was here, I was in Egypt. In particular, I was at Luxor for the International Collegiate Programming Championships. amazing event. Amazing the brains on display and the talent and the dedication that the teams have. Amazing event, yeah. And Jacob from OpenAI was there, and he did a really good talk on the future of generative AI, which you can find at this link here. That's the live stream for the day, by the way, so you'll have to hunt to find it, but it is in there. And at the end, there was a Q&A session, and he was asked this question: how long will it take before an AI can enter ICPC? Yeah? And this is his response: fairly close. I think it's definitely possible to do better than GPT-4. We're going to see more capable models. Think it's a matter of years. Okay, so the people who know definitely seem to be confident that there's a lot more capacity in there. And then what about education, okay? You can't stop the kids doing it. The kids are all right, okay? So the kids are definitely going to go out and use LLMs in their coding assignments. And, there are tricks that educators are using to, bias the question in a particular way so that you can tell if the generated code, came from an AI or whatever, but that's a kind of arms race, and the students are going to win because they're more dedicated, yeah? The students are going to win out. Yeah. There is what I call the pro argument, which says, who cares how somebody learns as long as they're learning? Okay? So let's say you had a student whose family were well-to-do and they employed a private tutor to teach them programming and help them with their assignments. Does that really matter as long as the student can come back into class and explain the code, defend the code, maintain the code, modify the code, and so on, So if learning is about climbing the mountain, who cares the route that they climbed? Okay? So I have a bunch of friends who make this argument, and they say, look, we've seen this before, yeah? So you've got people doing serverless and writing things from scratch through YAML files, and you go, no, real developers use Java and write microservices by hand, yeah? But then people go, Java? Coding within a VM using a garbage collector? Yeah, that's not real programming. But then people say, you're using a compiler? That's not programming, yeah? It's only real programming if you're doing assembly. And then people go, assembly on generic hardware bought from a store? That's not real programming. So, using generative AI and AI assistants and so on, it's just the next stage in our evolution. The kids are all right. It's all good. Yeah. I don't share their enthusiasm, okay? I subscribe to the con argument, and we can argue about this later. But this is that when you're learning to program, and we all remember the frustration and the pain that we went through learning to program, yeah, you were training up an LLM, the one between your ears, okay? And if you short-circuit that training process, yeah, then you're doing yourself an injustice. You're going to cause yourself problems. So every Christmas I try and learn a new task, yeah? Last Christmas I tried to learn Go. I am now an absurdly bad Go player, yeah? But I was recommended this book, and I read it. It's superb, and it contains this wonderful quote at the start: amateurs play at the game, professionals labor at it, yeah? So you folks are all professional developers. You know this as well as me. You have to grind. You have to do the head work. You have to learn how to program, and then learn how to program right, and then really understand what recursion is, and learn about optimization and patterns and all of this good stuff. And people who come to this conference are basically living that philosophy, yeah? So if you're using an AI assistant and generative AI and so on, are you shortcutting that process? So again, philosopher at college, I absolutely loved Wittgenstein, yeah? And famous quote from Wittgenstein: the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. True? Maybe? Yeah. But as developers, we never want to get to the point where the limits of the LLM, are the limits of our world. And I really think that's the danger. So then, trying to get to the final question, what are the opportunities? Well, ever since I first came into this area, it seemed to me that there are 3 layers in which AI can help us, okay? So layer 01 there, improve developer productivity. I think we've proved that. Things like the AI assistant, they prove that generative AI can make developers more productive, yeah? Where it gets more interesting is layer 2. And this is the thing that products like Amazon Q and so on are trying to get into. This is the idea that you can have an assistant where you say, okay, generate a Ruby on Rails project from scratch, with a shopping basket for buying shoes or something like this, Or you have an existing project, let's say it's a Spring Boot or a Ktor microservice or something like this, and it has a well-written README, and the assistant can read the README and deploy the thing, test the thing, extend the thing, and so on, So can we get tools that can read, deploy, update, maintain, and so on at the level of the entire project? And this is a really interesting debate. This is going to be settled, I think, over the next year or two as we see new products that do this being released. And then level 3 is where we build things that we just couldn't have done before. So chatbots that automatically translate between languages or teach us something from end to end. So we already have ways of writing algorithms that we couldn't have conceived of a few years ago. You can upload 100 pictures of kittens and say, which of these is the most fluffy? Try writing that in C. And eventually, if you follow level 3 far enough, then you get to a real, genuine artificial intelligence, and we're at the HAL stage, and maybe it's time to get worried. So a really, really great talk about this, large language models and the end of programming. This really changed my view of what might be achievable through generative AI. Can't recommend that talk enough. And in that talk, they mentioned this book, which again was my Christmas reading. I was reading this on the plane flight over, and it's the only book I'm aware of that does a serious scholarly analysis of what might happen if we truly create, an AI superintelligence. And I really love this quote at the bottom, because this takes me back to my days in philosophy. So when philosophers criticize psychologists, they say, look, you as psychologists have this idea that human intelligence is in some way, the peak of the mountain, the best, and you're trying to emulate this. But no, the more we learn about vision, the more we learn that we're not seeing the real world. We're seeing a representation of the real world. We're seeing things that it's proved evolutionarily, if that's a word, useful for us to notice. And the same for all of our senses, the same for our cognition. That's where we get all these cognitive biases from and so on. So the big danger is that if we train up something, it's not going to stop at human intelligence. It could just keep going. Human intelligence, there's nothing necessarily special about us. Or the really, really scary thing is that it evolves intelligence in a way that we're just not capable of recognizing. So it becomes capable of having intentions and making plans and doing things and so on, but in a way that we're just not wired to understand as intelligence. And that's been really well explored in a couple of good sci-fi books that I would love to talk to you about, but come see me after. So some conclusions. We're almost done. Is the hype about AI justified? Yes. Will it be replacing developers anytime soon? No. Okay. Integrating AI into existing developer workflows and tools, incredibly powerful. Because it can enhance productivity whilst preserving familiarity. And we're on a journey to discover. None of us knows right now where the limits of that are. Those limits are going to be tested, over the next 2, 3, 5 years. And we're still unsure, to which degree LLMs can help us, or the right way to help the LLMs to help us. So will it be fine-tuning, grounding, RAG, all this stuff, or will it be about retraining and creating new models in an environmentally friendly way? We don't know yet. It's going to be fun finding out. But some questions, final thoughts that occurred to me while I was writing this talk. For the past 10 years or so, there's been an explosion in polyglot programming. New languages, new frameworks, new libraries, all these kinds of things. But I was actually discussing this on the bus on the way up from the airport. So will AI kill polyglot programming? In other words, if we get dependent on AI assistants and tools that create and maintain and extend projects for us, well, obviously they're going to work better with things that are in the AI's training set. So will this put the brake on the growth of new languages and frameworks? Will we go for stability instead? Or I tried to think of a better way of saying this. AI is the current platform shift. We have yet to have a platform shift in in the age of AI, okay? So when the next big thing comes along and we're trying to adapt to it, how much will AI help or hinder us? To me, that's a really, really fascinating question, yeah? And then a kind of related question, what platforms will flourish in the age of AI? So if we all start generating code and all of this stuff, will dynamically typed languages prove better? Or will statically typed languages prove better? I can see how you can make an argument from either direction. What about functional versus OO? Encapsulated versus more general programming? There's all kinds of interesting questions. So again, I think this is going to impact heavily on how we write code and what languages and frameworks we choose. And I don't have a clue what's going to happen, but it's going to be an awful lot of fun finding out. So that's me. Any questions? Nope. Thank you very much. Questions, thoughts, comments?
Thanks very much for the talk. It's really thought-provoking. I have one question on sort of just the IDE part and then a more philosophical one. So on the IDE part, when you talk about refactoring,
yes.
Are there any limits on sort of what can LLM do anything, just like rewrite the code entirely, or are there any sort of limitations in place to check that it's not changing maybe much of the code structure, or is it just renaming the variables? Can it do anything?
As far as I know, it's only acting on the code that you've highlighted and suggesting the changes within there, so it's not going out and restructuring your entire project for you.
Okay, so it's within the function, but
yes.
Inside the function.
It's within the code that you've highlighted and sent as part of the context, yeah.
Okay, got it. And then is there any, so if I'm a developer and maybe then I'm making a commit, is there any way for me to see sort of which parts of the code were AI generated, or is it all authored by the developer who's just using the AI assistant?
Because if you've used the AI assistant functionality to make a whole pile of changes, yeah, and then you're going to put those into a single commit, you can ask the assistant to write the commit message for you, but it's not going to be any better than you are, at working out what was and what wasn't done with the AI assistant. So the message isn't going to say these lines from these files were changed with AI, but that's not what we want anyway, because we want the linkage between the two to be seamless. So you might have just opened a chat window and put in a prompt and got an idea and used that in your code anyway, and how could it tell? So.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is that maybe if I'm the user and I'm trusting the AI a lot, and other people are not aware that some of this code was just generated by the AI, maybe I didn't put much thinking into it, or I didn't do as well of a testing, then is there a way for, like during the code review, is there a way for other people to maybe see that this piece of code needs more attention?
Not within the AI assistant itself. But we do have code analysis tools that will look at your code and try and make suggestions, but that level of functionality doesn't exist yet. And if I was a project manager, I would try to avoid that. If I had a junior developer and I didn't trust them, I still wouldn't trust them with the AI assistant, if you know what I mean. So I would, it's like your kids. I would gently reach down and take the hatchet out of their hands before they did some damage with it, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So the other thing, it seems like we're making an assumption that AI helps productivity, but recently there has been some research coming out which shows that with the increased use of AI, there are more like security vulnerabilities, more bugs and so on. So like it does increase productivity in some ways, but also has some potential dangers. So I'm just wondering sort of what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this is the good old problem that whenever you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's like in the good old days when the internet came along and Wikipedia was there and people were just copying and pasting, yeah? And if you have any interest in politics, you'll know that there's this problem with politicians' biographies being poisoned, with false information and details about them, and then people believing and copying copying this and students into their essays and so on. So yeah, I think that there's definitely a problem, as with any new tool, that it will get overused. We've got to put in guardrails and learn where the boundaries are and so on. And especially with things like security, there will be so much data in the training set that either because it's example code, or sample code, or just code that's badly written, that it does have the potential for security vulnerabilities. And we just have to let people know that it's not the Oracle at Delphi, it's not some magic thing that's going to give you true answers. It's going to put you on the path to knowledge, but you have to walk that path yourself. And there are all kinds of things to watch out for along the way.
Right, so you're thinking in the realm of AI assistants and IDEs, there's just more to be done to make sure that programmers understand when they're...
Yes, and more to be done at the project management level and the kind of social engineering level and in the education of developers and so on. In the same way that when Java came along and it was garbage collected, and you couldn't just say, okay, forget about memory management, it's all good. Go and create your 3 million box array and don't worry about when it gets garbage collected, and everything will still be fine. Yes, you're working in a better, more productive environment. You have to worry less, but there are still things you have to worry about. So in that sense, I think it is the same as before.
Okay, that's a good way of putting things.
Yeah. Cool.
So in your first example, you showed having the AI refactor some code.
Yes.
Or like giving some more comments and renaming things.
Yeah.
And one of the things it could do is rename the function that you're refactoring.
Yes.
And it seems like it would be an obvious step. Why can't, in the insert the new definition into my program, it also does the refactor of renaming the function?
I think the answer to that is because, yes, in that case it's obvious, but there are lots more corner cases where it isn't as obvious. So hopefully in the future all those corner cases get addressed, but it's we're moving forward step by step. Yeah.
Is there an issue of you can't make sure the AI does some very specific thing? It kind of sometimes it'll do it, sometimes it'll do it slightly differently.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is certainly a problem. That you might be going out to different providers, but even if you're going to the same provider on the same day, it might always suggest something slightly different. So there's always that lack of determinism there. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Cool, very good. So just to say, we will put all of these slides online. They will be available. There is that repo. You can get the AI Assistant on a trial basis. I encourage you to have a play and let us know what you think. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.